Uh, we are very fortunate tonight to have John Ronda Lewis. Most of us know him as Ronda. And he's going to be talking to us about Colonel Adams. And thank you from the 150 team and for coming out in a less than perfect night. And I hope you learn something, and I hope you enjoy the talk. Okay, got it.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. I want to mention just a little bit more in introduction, and I hope that you become a member. And this is not, didn't cost you any money, didn't cost any dues. We haven't collected a single penny in dues. We do make some contributions sometimes, and voluntarily, if you see something that needs to be done in town to help out. What was it, about 5 years ago? 6 now, right? 6 years ago, I come back to Old Fort about once every quarter, all the seasons. I come back to visit my sister and my dad, and who since have both passed away. But we try to come spend a little time before Christmas, sometime in the spring, maybe do some trout fishing, sometime in the summer, and then in the fall to see the pretty colors. So we try to make it 4 times. But I kept coming back to Old Fort and looked down the streets. It seemed like the town was just shrinking. More storefronts shuttered, closed. And it began to get on your nerves when you live, 400 miles away. Your hands are tied, basically not being able to do anything. So I called Kathy and Judy and some of my other classmates, alumni, and I said, "Is there not something we can do? It's a great place to live, a great place to grow up. What's happening? Our industry is leaving us." And so we had several meetings. We get together and eat. We had sometimes 50, 55 people gathered down at the, Hungry Fisherman, or the Hook and Anchor fish place in Marion. And we had, anybody know where that is? But anyway, and we put out this idea. There's something we just want to think tank. We want ideas more than anything. And we're not asking anybody, like I said before, to contribute any money. Can do it voluntarily, of course, if you see something that needs done. And we want your ideas. We went through, and these are not all of them, but these are some things we developed probably in the first year. And we said, hey, man, when I was a kid, I used to hunt and hike all these trails in the Pisgah National Forest. It's a great place to go and recreate. You come down the interstate and you see entering Pisgah National Forest, get up here above town, it's leaving Pisgah National Forest. Thousands of visitors going by. Doesn't know there's 70,000 acres in our county, at least, playground. Where you can have a wonderful time. So we said, the trails. One of the ideas we came up with, right down here at this bridge, it's almost exactly 5,280 feet to the top of Mount Mitchell. You're very close to Mount Mitchell. In fact, we're so close to it, we can't see it. You stand in the middle of John's Market, or where John's Market was, and you can't see the mountain. It's only 8 miles away as a crow flies. Take you a little more effort and a little more miles to get there. But we would want to advertise it, get people from some of our population centers, Charlotte, Greenville, Spartanburg, to come to Old Fort and do a mile vertical climb. And the one we talked about, then we met with the trails group. Some of those who came to our meetings when we had our meals and so forth, they were very interested in developing trails. And this has been, we can't claim a lot of credit. Other people did the work, didn't they, Kathy? Just did the most. We just sort of, what we used to call that in chemistry, a catalyst. Don't have anything to do with the reaction, but promote it. And sort of like that little spark that starts a great big, I'll talk about forest fires later. That's something that's just little that has a big result. So this has been success, and it's going to be a continued success, and will add to business opportunities in Old Fort. These people are going to need their bikes fixed. that are on their bikes. They're going to need backpacks. They're going to need trail meals. They're going to need boots. They're going to need different things to go on the trail. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because this is not part of the presentation. This is for free. I love to trout fish. I love to fly fish. Okay? And as I've been coming home, I'm noticing, and I fished all over many of the trout streams in McDowell County. If I happen to say Limestone, that's the county I live in now in Alabama. But I'm in McDowell County, and I noticed the quality seemed like of the fishing. I was catching less fish and they're smaller. That kind of bothered me. You know, when I was a kid, if my dad didn't have me in the garden plowing or cutting wood, I'm in the trout stream doing this number right here. And enjoyed it so much. It's a beautiful scenery. That early morning time or that afternoon time when it's just about dusk is, it has a spiritual quality to it. It really does. And besides that, you're catching a meal sometimes. So we've tried to promote that. We work with the state. We're trying to get more trout in more places. We talk about, we've got some people to agree, and we almost have the mileage. If we can get a mile of Crooked Creek, okayed by the owner to let people come on their property and fish down the creek, with some restrictions. You know, you can't just trample people's crops. You go in at the right place and come out the right place. Don't trash the place. And take care of it, that we can get the state to stock part of Crooked Creek. So that's ongoing. That's not the outstanding success we hope it will be. Canoeing. We investigated this. Mitch, is Mitch Arnie here tonight?
He's not here.
Mitch investigated this for us, and we wanted to make this the head starting place to kayak the Catawba River. There is a kayaking trail, of course, starts, what is that, Ristaflex Road, used to be air preheater. You get in there and it goes down to, if you want to go as far as Lake James, or they will pick you up at the McDowell House, or on 221 just below the McDowell House. I came up one summer and kayaked it myself, and I really enjoyed myself. That's a great trip if you want to do it just from Pleasant Gardens down to the McDowell House, which also the original Pleasant Gardens. So Mitch found out that the EMT folks and the folks having to respond to people in the stream, that it was real hard to get to some places in the upper part of above Pleasant Gardens. So we had to kind of concede this, and a lot of times we don't have enough water here during tourist time, during the prime tourist time for doing canoeing. You'd be pulling your boat across the shoals more than riding, and I don't like to do that. Nobody else does. You want to ride the water. So, you know, Pleasant Gardens and downstream probably got this, but let's promote. There's a little company in Marion that does the pickup, put you in and take you out. What we've read from their customer returns is that they do an excellent job. So if you get a chance, you want to go canoeing, by all means, go to Pleasant Garden, get those folks involved. You know, the money comes into McDowell County. Some of it will come here. Rock climbing. We talked to people in the Pisgah National Forest headquarters. Do you care if we do some rock climbing or promote it on the National Forest property? No, only thing, if it's peregrine falcon and they're nesting in the top of it, you got to be hands off until that nesting season is over with. That's the only restriction. Now, there's all kind of problems with safety. If you're a rock climber, I used to think that I'd be one. I don't think I would do that anymore. I have rappelled off of the Nancy Cliffs as a kid without any instruction or training by myself. And is Billy Sanders here? And Billy Sanders. Okay. That's privately owned. You got to have some relief there, probably for legal means, for if somebody gets hurt. You know, that private owner is not wanting to bear any liability there. So if you come climb, it'd be kind of climb at your own risk if we could get that. We've been investigating that, so that one's slightly on hold. Train excursion. Kathy, are you still a member of the board? North Carolina's trying to promote an excursion for trains, starting at Statesville, going to at least to Asheville, and at the roundhouse, doing a turnaround and coming back down. Most exciting part of that trip is where? Right here to the top of the mountain. You know, that's the one that we all love, and we rode as kids and rode it from Black Mountain down here, from here to Black Mountain. You know, it's like your own local roller coaster. But we're trying to promote that, and the state's willing to help. 90%? Maybe with the funds, some great big percentage if you can get the funding from another source to take care of the other 10%. I don't know, I kind of lost track because we've been so busy with other things. The fort, the Davidson's fort, The fauna flora trail that's going to be developed and it's going to go right by that fort. What an opportunity. You think about people are thinking, hey, I'm a hiker out here, I'm like in 1775, and right there's the fort. We tried to get them, we tried to help the folks that, the owners and the people who operate that to plant a green space in between the fort. One thing I said, I try to treat myself just like, okay, now I'm a visitor, I'm not a homeboy. Okay, come down the interstate and I see advertisement for Davidson's Fort. Here it's going to be a replica of the fort. Let's go see it. And two kids in the back, yeah, that's great, that's great. I come off the interstate, I can't find a way to get down there. You know, you have to be born in Old Fort to live here. You know, I used to go down, we lived in Tate's Apartments for a few months while our house was being built when we moved from Alabama. And they closed the road there. I could tell somebody, go down there to that street, go out Lackey Town Road, bang, on your left. Well, it's a little more difficult trip now, knowledge-wise, knowing how to get down there. And Kathy and I drove down there. We were there in the summer, and the fescue was about that deep. I talked to the man who's the president of that outfit, and I said, ladies aren't going to come step out of their car with skirts on, or maybe even pants, in knee-deep fescue. You know, snakes are in those things. and they know that they're there. I said, so our club has helped those folks with mowing. Volunteer contribution to have that mowed. Now I think somebody else has stepped up and picked that up, but our club did that. Last year they had the most assemblages, and they had two. A fellow told me personally, he said, this is the most money that we've ever made. They've always gone a little bit broke on every event they had, lost a little money, or just broke even. Last year, at one event, they made several $100s. The people making money, what are they going to do? I'll do it again, right? I'll do it again. And so we want to make that a real attraction there. Just think about if somebody was a napper of arrowhead. I like to make arrowheads myself. But if somebody was just a mediocre napper, sell hundreds of dollars of what they call projectile points now. They say they weren't really arrowheads, but projectile points. And all other kinds of things, moccasins, those things that, and we didn't even mention here, craft. We love to have a craft store here. Genuine, Appalachian, homemade crafts, and let the people at home make most of the money, not the organization. If you go to one organization, I'll not call their name. You take a $200 quilt in there, they're going to charge $400. Anybody want to pay $400 for a quilt? It's going to have to be excellent quality. Boy, I do. My wife's mother makes them and gives them to me. I don't need any. But if I were in the market, $400, maybe I'll buy it, maybe I won't. But say if there was just a 20% markup. Okay, all right. $240, whatever that is. You know, I might think about buying. So we'd love to have a craft store, craft school, where people teach their crafts and hand it on down to the different generations. And then we said, okay, we get most of these are recreational. They're pretty vigorous recreational things. You might have, some people get old and their hair turns white and their mustache, and they're not able to do the things they did at one time physically. Maybe you want to take a 6-mile bike ride on the road, a 2-mile walk. Maybe I'd like to go back to town and have me a cup of coffee and read a good book. Well, what about reading about some of our ancestors in this town and some of the accomplishments that were made here? We asked people voluntarily. We talked to the Adams descendants. We talked to the Noblet descendants. We talked to the Walkers, the Silvers descendants. Please write down or give us as much information as you can about your ancestor and let us assemble it in a book or books, and maybe open up a library at a bookstore where you can come in, have a cup of coffee, and read about our town and its outstanding citizens. So this is what brings us to the night. How's that for an introduction? It only took half the time. Okay. By the way, we're not gonna, done quite a bit of public speaking. You all have known me as a little kid. You came up to me facing beautiful girl, especially a teenage girl, come to me. I'm about 5 or 6 years old. I'm looking at my fingernails. I'm not going to say anything timid as could be. And I got over that over the years, and sometimes even preached at the local church. And my wife tells me, she said, "You got a little long-winded today." She said, "People's attention span's only like 20 minutes, 25 at the best." So after about 20 minutes of this, I want you to take a break, get a drink of water, have a cookie, but I want you to come look at some of the literature about Colonel Adams that I have displayed here on this table. They are, some of them are photographs that we have made of things that he designed and built. Some of them are from the National Forest Service, where he built the first fire tower. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And there's several things up here about Colonel Adams I think you will enjoy. I can't answer all the questions I know that you'll have. When we start talking about this man, it's almost like, it's like looking into a beehive. The business and the things that went on during those 85 years will astound you. And I'm going to tell you, we're going to get to about, I hope, and this may be optimistic, I think I know about 60% of the things, 65, so 2/3. And I'm going to be able to hit the tops of the waves on that 60% tonight. And when you see later on, what I'd like for you to do, if it's agreeable to you, after the break, we'll take about 10, 15 minutes and look at these things and enjoy refreshments or water, and take a seat for another 15, 20 minutes, and I'll try to take you through the second half. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. I don't want to bore you. But let's start with the subject. I hope you got a copy of the handout. It's one with the hexagonal pictures on it. And you kind of use that as an outline. We didn't hand out the complicated outline, which I do have a set for the Adams family members. Sheila's here, or other members here? Okay, we've got an outline for you. This is just like mine, except mine's in bigger font.
She gave me a copy.
Okay, wonderful. That's wonderful. There may be some things in there that you did not know about your granddad, about accomplishments that he made. I found the wonderful thing about doing research is sometimes you're searching for things. I need this piece of information. Maybe it's in Ashe County. Maybe it's in Raleigh. Maybe it's with Duke Power. Maybe it's with another company. Maybe it's with the U.S. Army. Maybe it's with the Forest Service. But you discover things that are outstanding that you didn't even know about. I wasn't even searching for this. And I'll show you an example in just a little bit. But if you start at the top of this, early life, and I'm going to call him Colonel Adams. He wasn't known as a colonel until he entered, he's over 40 years old. And he becomes a colonel after going to officer training. He'd been to military school as a teenager, a military academy as a teenager, private military academy, and he joined the Army when the U.S. was getting into World War I. And he went to officer training school and advanced very quickly to lieutenant colonel. And so everybody in Old Fort, that's what I called him. That's what my dad called him. It was Colonel Adams. And of course, Daniel W. Adams, 1872 to 1957. He was born, and most of this always probably doesn't know this, in Louisiana, not in North Carolina. His mother was a Callaway from Ashe County, North Carolina, and he had an aunt that lived down in that part of the country over in Louisiana who was also a Callaway, the other Colonel Adams' mother's sister. And they had both married Confederate officers. Colonel Adams' mother had married Brigadier General Daniel W. Adams. He was wounded, I believe, at Shiloh, and suffered for that. He lost an eye. And they were almost to take his body to the morgue or to the cemetery, and he was on the wagon that was supposed to be going to the field hospital, and they slung his body out of the wagon. He survived that gunshot wound and all that tumbling and everything like that, and recovered and went back and commanded forces at other places in Tennessee and in Alabama. All right, so you have quite a bit of pedigree, children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren, of people who are very talented. The mother, I'll mention again, she was a descendant of Daniel Boone's mother and daddy. In other words, Daniel Boone had sisters and brothers. They're descendants of she was a descendant of one of those. Her dad James Calloway was a medical doctor. He was born in Ashe County and then went to medical school in Philadelphia, became an MD, came back to Wilkes County, North Carolina, developed a great practice, became quite wealthy, bought lots of pieces of land, big pieces of land, and expanded his practice into the surrounding counties, including back into Ashe County. I'll mention this before I forget it. When I went to Ashe County, I got into the courthouse looking for deeds and for records, and went to the archives. I went onto the archives, and I mentioned this man, Daniel W. Adams, that his ancestors were from here. You folks and I was really looking for his experience as a railroad engineer, not one that drives a railroad, but laying out, so like I did, laying out track, route surveying. Very similar to laying out the center line of a highway, similar to laying out a railroad. There's a little bit of difference. I've laid out so many switches that it just, go home at night and all we can see is railroad tracks. But anyway, he was doing that. So I thought, when they built a railroad from Abingdon, Virginia, through the mountains to Ashe County, Jefferson, and the family has on record that in his early part of his career, after he finished college in Louisiana, he'd gone back to Louisiana to finish a degree in civil engineering and geology, went back to Ashe County, where his mother was from. I have documents. They were there in the 1880 census. She's 41 years old, and he is 7. If they did the census in the early part of 1880, Colonel Adams was born in December of the year, so while they were taking the census, he was just aged to be 7 years. She was 41. And she's mentioned as being a housekeeper, and he's in school, it says, on their census records. So I was searching for more records, and I go over to the archive, and I said, when this railroad reached Jefferson, and you'll understand a little bit more about political power in just a little bit, did you not have a celebration in this town? You know, a lot of places, when the railroad reached out west, you remember Blazing Saddles? You remember the movie Blazing Saddles? They were wanting to get the railroad to come to Rock Ridge, and the villains, you know, they got the Nazis and all the bad guys in the world to come try to get the railroad moved somewhere else. Well, we thought they would have a big celebration and evidence of it. I said, you don't have a photograph. I'm hoping to find Colonel Adams in that photograph. No, we don't have one. Do you have any records of the railroad company's employees from, let's say, 1896 to 1905? No, sir, we don't have him that. I said, well, this man's name, he was born down in Louisiana, and he came here. I have the record that he came here and lived as a child. And I gave his name. And then I gave out, and I said, he was born on a Bowie plantation in Louisiana. And the guy turns up like this, and he says, oh, Tam Bowie. Colonel Adams' first cousin. His mother's sister had moved herself and her boy, after her husband had died, back to mother and daddy also. Okay, is Thomas E., is that right? Thomas E., or I don't know what his middle name, but it's Thomas, and they named him, or nicknamed him in Ashe County, Tam Bowie. Tam Bowie, go back just a little bit, James Calloway spent 3 sessions in the North Carolina legislature, so politically powerful family. His grandson was elected 11 times to the North Carolina State Legislature and was the Speaker of the House for one of those sessions. He ran for the governor, but could not secure the primary votes for the governorship of North Carolina. And of course, at that time, if you didn't get the Democrat nomination, you weren't elected. So politically well connected. He had a lot of things done. Tam Bowie was able to move the location of the railroad, his cousin's stake in the railroad, from the center of Ashe County, which is the city of Jefferson, over to West Jefferson. If you go now, you see where all the businesses are. They're lined up over in West Jefferson. And the courthouse and the archives building are over in Jefferson. So sometimes political power does count for things practical. All right. That's just the early life and education. Let's move on quickly. In 1905, the Forest Service was created by the U.S. government, but Teddy Roosevelt signed that into law, and Colonel Adams went to work for them right off the bat. All right, some things that you learn quickly about the Forest Service is that they had no land in the eastern United States. Everything was practically privately owned, except for military reservations and sometimes federal cemeteries, like at Chattanooga, the Chickamauga National Cemetery, those kind of things. Okay, but the U.S. government still owned tracts of land out in Arizona and Montana and Idaho that had not been homesteaded. And a lot of them had already been described as forest preserves. And the government, somebody in the government had enough sense, if we'll preserve these forests and not denude the forest out there, when we have a flash flood, when we have a big rain, a thunderstorm, it won't wash the bottomland away. It was protection of the watershed. And so you folks may or may not know this, a lot of our lands out west, and this is real important to a land surveyor. If you go out, North Carolina and the rest of the 13 colonies, including Tennessee and Kentucky, are what we call meets and bounds descriptions. I have a favorite one up here. I'm a registered land surveyor in Tennessee and Alabama, and a registered engineer. Came and did some surveying at home one time, back in the 80s, early 80s. There's a description up on Honeycutt Creek up North Cove. And it says this: begin at a small walnut tree on the bank of Mule Branch where it enters Honeycutt Creek. Well, that's not precise, because then it says thence up the branch. Well, you just said the tree is on the bank. Okay, and a few feet didn't matter to people back then about that. So, okay, it's where the branch comes into the creek. And then he gives compass bearings, and usually you can tell that they're compass bearings because they're just given the closest degree. There's no minutes or seconds. And they're given the distances and things that you folks may or may not understand in chains and links or poles. The gunner's chain is 66 feet long. And the reason for that is if you have a square chain, you have 1/10 of an acre. So if you figure up the acreage in a good closed survey, and you come out with 225 square chains, then it's, did I say that right? 225 square chains is 22.5 acres. You're just pulling off a decimal point. That was the reason that was done. When Jefferson and Washington saw all the complications, there's tracts of land up around Honeycutt Creek where there's a double ridge that has no ownership. Nobody owned it. You run out the description and stay with the calls. You'll go up to the top of one ridge, you go over to the other creek, and a lot of our descriptions in the mountains are start at a creek and maybe go up another creek or a ridge to the top of a big ridge that comes off of the Blue Ridge and describe that tract of land. All right? Sometimes you go up and you come from the other side and the two don't meet. So here's a space of land North Carolina recognized, hey, we're not getting tax off of it. Nobody owns it. If you'll get a survey around that and pay taxes on it for 5 years, we'll give you a deed for that tract of land that has that hiatus. Thomas Jefferson and George Washington recognized the problem early in their career. And they devised a thing when we take the Indians' land away from them, we're going to do this. And Alabama and Mississippi, Ohio, and Indiana are the first 4 states. And they're basically going to lay out townships. It's 6 miles north and south, 6 miles east and west. Got 36, and I won't take time to divide these. Square miles in it. You could probably, if you go out as a settler, you're probably going to buy a square mile or a quarter of a square mile. It's called a section. And they have numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is what I don't understand. Surveyors are educated people. Why don't you come here and name this 7? No, they started here. This is 7. Drive you crazy to figure out. Some people would describe this corner of this section, the southwest corner, section 1. Well, it's also the southeast corner of section 2, same point. They laid off 36 sections with these gunner chains and a pretty sophisticated compass. That actually wasn't even a transit, they stuck in the ground. And they laid these off, and the ones in Alabama are now right at 200 years old. They started the survey in about 1815 and finished it up in 1835. And we could talk about survey, we could take 8 hours to talk about survey. Land survey, not the engineering, just the things that went on. For instance, they would pay a Cherokee Indian, take your wagon, take us some slabs of bacon and flour and sugar and coffee and put it in a tarp and hang it up in the biggest cedar tree that you can find, where Cedar Creek comes into Bear Creek in West Alabama. David Setzer, he knows where that is. And we're here now working in the woods, not going to the Best Western tonight like my surveyors did and I did. We're going into at least a McDonald's and get a meal. You're bivouac. You're out there in the woods for months. And they're telling this guy, put us a month's worth of rations in that tree, and when we get there, we'll retrieve it. And they gave him the money to buy it, and paid him to do it. Just that kind of thing. You think about being for months in the summer, in the insects, the heat, and in the winter, in the cold. You're going to be there, survey. Guess what they got? The party was 6 men. They got $10 a mile. Each one of these lines, $1 for the whole party. David, if you were an axe man cutting line, you'd probably get a dime a day. A dime a day. Can you imagine? I think I walk. I'll go farm before I'll do this. Okay. The reason I'm saying this, long story short, in Arizona, the surveys are fresh. They're not old. They've just been done. In fact, Arizona's not even a state in 1905. And so Colonel Adams and those guys that went with him, and there's pictures of him on the trip out there. There's pictures of him peering over into Apache Indian Reservation. This is a time Geronimo lived at 1908 or 9. This is before Geronimo died. There's still possibly hostiles right there. They're going out there to create a national forest. We don't have any land in the east, we've got land in the west. Let's go find those corners. We'll describe these sections. And you might, in this township, you might not get the whole section. Part of it's already bought. You know, something's already like that. Well, this is going to become part of the Tonto National Forest. Went out there in 1905, they come back with 6. And Colonel Adams didn't work on, as far as I can tell, the Kaibab National Forest, which is north of the Grand Canyon. But the Seagraves, Apache Indian Reservation, the Tonto Reservation, the Coronado Reservation, and what's that? Prescott. That's where everybody wants to say it's a great place to live. Prescott, Arizona, Prescott National Forest were created real quickly in a couple of years, and they're coming back. Well, it comes to Arkansas. Arkansas is a place originally called the Arkansas National Forest, and later the Ozark National Forest up about Fort Smith, and then down close to Hot Springs. It's now called the Washita. The Washita River flows right through it. The Colonel Adams put his yeoman's work, I call it, in there. And he became the chief of that whole national forest. But while he was there, he decided that, hey, we're losing a lot of valuable timber to forest fire. In fact, he showed the numbers where we're losing as much timber as we're harvesting. We're cutting so many board feet, going out here for furniture or for structural timber, we're losing that much to forest fire. He said, I think that I can invent a method where I can spot these fires quickly. And the problem was they had firefighters. And they had tools. He made better tools, by the way. And he said, if we can spot them quickly, they were taking whatever transportation they had, horses, wagons, and later on, automobiles. We're taking the fighting crews to the wrong place. I'll show you in this book, The Pisgah National Forest, there's a forest ranger who's got one of these little pump cars. I think it's actually a bicycle. They had those cars that you've seen this on the Westerns. They had one rigged up that was lightweight, made out of aluminum or some lightweight metal. And the guy's sitting there doing the bicycle. And it's driving him down, and he's searching for fire. Well, he looks across the ridge and says, well, from right here where I am, it's about 2 miles. Let's say it's on Jack's Mountain. Okay, you send the firefighter crew to Jack's Mountain, it's actually across Hickory. We don't have to take another hour, maybe 2, to get to the fire. So if the fire that was 2 acres, it's now become 20. If you're out there, and I tell you, if any of you ever fought forest fire, Ronnie, others, it's some of the hardest work they can testify that you'll do. Sometimes you'll be coming along and literature that I've read said forest fire with just a mild breeze can race along the ground and gain 14.2 miles per hour. Now, down here on the track and on the athletic field, I used to run about 20 miles an hour. I can't do that anymore. I don't know if I can do 15. If a forest fire gets after me, I'm just going to have to turn and try to find the thinnest place and go through it and go backwards. Okay? 14. So if you let fire go, at that speed it doubles about every 30 minutes. So when you're losing time, you're losing valuable, and then it may get so big, nobody can touch it. So it's a matter of triangulation. I'll try to show this. This is not going to be a surveying class, but if you have position, some way to position yourself, and I have some quad sheets with me. But let's just say that this sheet is a quad sheet, and I have a position here, and the forest fire is happening here. I see a smoke. And I have another position here. I know where it is on the map. If some way I can get it now, when I say the word azimuth, my wife says, you say azimuth, it turns people off. All azimuth is, folks, is this: 0 degrees. And azimuth is the easiest way to understand direction. Bearings confuses, or any lawyers here, I don't want to, what did I say? Not embarrass or insult lawyers, but I've had them turn my bearings around and something north 45 east, if you're going the other way, should be south 45 west. You got to change both of them. You see, you understand that. I've gotten back from lawyers where they went the opposite way, they changed the first one, but not the other one. But if you use azimuth, there's no ambiguity. Start there with 0 and go clockwise. 90 is east. 180 south. Keep up with me. Y'all help me. That's west. I think 345 is a Boy Scout. I remember that's northwest. And then 0 is back at north. So when I say 120, that's that direction. Okay, if I find a fire and I'm looking in the northwest quadrant and I can communicate to somebody who's got a map of my position and this position, and my buddy over here gives an azimuth from here, guess what? Precisely on the map. Now we're talking about, some of these sites are 20 miles. Most of them probably average about 10 to 15. But you can get that fire located within about 200 yards. You put a crew out there within 200 yards, they know where the fire is then. You know, if I build a fire down here 200 yards away and it gets to be 2 acres, you know where it is if I put you right here. So now we've got a crew. The only caveat to that is if you have a fire that's almost on the line between the two. Then you got real thin intersecting lines, and it could be anywhere along that line. So a third one, though, and let's say I got the position right there, but I have a third buddy here, and he cuts it in also, and it precisely locates it. In fact, you could just take these two. We talk about strength of figure. Something has a real weak angle, you're going to get a real weak answer. You get a real strong angle like that from 30 to 120 degrees, you're going to pin that thing down. Rush your crew there, they put the fire out. Anybody getting thirsty yet?
I have questions.
Sure.
So, when you talk about Colonel Adams, there's always, and you talk about the firefighting, there's always the use of the word triangulation. So is that the triangulation?
That's when you hear triangulation. Now triangulation was not invented by Colonel Adams. We've been doing triangulation, military and so forth, for back to the Romans, you know.
But he utilized that.
But you put the platform up on a high point. Now I've got a plane table. I didn't bring it in because of the rain. I've mapped untold acres of property with a plane table. And it's mainly done by triangulation. Triangulation stated azimuth and the rangefinder. And map position, it's just as good if you did 1 part in 25,000 traverse closure and plotted it on the map. My map would look like your map. It would lay right on top of it. It would be a duplicate. There's a picture in here. Oh, this was such a good idea. Gifford Pinchot was the first director of the Forest Service. He had been managing the Pisgah Forest, now not national to it, the Pisgah forest for George Vanderbilt. George Vanderbilt dies, and then the idea of the national forest come along. By the way, these ideas have been developing. People in the United States, like you and I, have been living out and said, we're denuding our forest. We're killing, taking all the forest away. New England to the south, and Michigan, Minnesota, Oregon. And folks were saying, we got to slow down here a little bit. Then there are two different schools. Schools of preservation. We want to preserve the forest like they always were since time immemorial. That's the national parks. But other people said, let's take care of the forest. Let's use to get the products out of it. And by the way, besides timber for furniture and housing and structures, I have a list of thousands of products that come out of the forest. I didn't even mention paper, did I? Look at the volume of wood that goes into paper making. Medicines, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics. Just go on and on and on. And there's hundreds of those things. And not only that, then there's the product if you get a little bit upset with a spouse and a little bit ill, go take a walk in the woods. It's a spiritual, it'll change your attitude, really. You start hearing that trickle of water, which is preserved by the forest. And you hear the blow of the wind and in the shade. Maybe walk into a little cooler place. Our house is located up on top of a hill. And right below it's a deep hollow. You can feel the temperature drop when you drop down into that hollow. You can hear the trickle of the water. Come back out of there 15 minutes later. Hey, I'm a new man. I need to go change some of the things I said to that lady. Right? And vice versa. So the psychological and mental benefits to just get to take whatever they have. These trails in the forest, that's what part of that's about. Promote the mental health and the physical health of the individuals that are participating in it. Okay, we got pictures of Colonel Adams. Mentioned Gifford Pinchot, first director of the Forest Service. He said, Colonel Adams, this is a great thing. I agree with this. It's absolutely correct. We don't have the money to build them. Colonel Adams showed him the numbers of what could be saved. And he actually demonstrated. These guys didn't go out and build a fire. They took helium balloons or hydrogen balloons about 10 feet across, and they would raise them, and these observers in these fire towers that he built didn't know where they were. They wouldn't tell them. They're keeping it secret. And they cut, I call it cutting in. They cut in the fire, and they showed Pinchot, hey, you told me all this exactly where the balloon was coming up. Now the wind's going to move that. That's one thing. When smoke blows, you're going to get a little air because of that. Because when the smoke comes up above the canopy, it may be a little bit away from where the fire actually is. Which, like I said, you get a crew within 200, 300, they know where the fire is. He also, and then we'll look at that just a little bit. Gifford Pinchot came to see a little later on, this is great stuff. We're going to find the money to build it. And they built a lot in the Washita National Forest. It demonstrated years after Colonel Adams had left the Forest Service, about 30 years, they wrote him a letter back and said, we are saving. They had the numbers. It's actually more in the Washita National Forest than it was anywhere else. It was 10%. We're only losing 10% of the board feet of lumber to fires that we were before you started this project. And of course, it took a while to get all those towers built that we're familiar with. In the Washita, it was less than, it was like 7%. So, Gifford Pinchot said, and he commissioned him to write this pamphlet. I've got a copy of this. Talk about our federal government and its agencies. Sometimes I go and try to deal with them. I get a phone. When are we going to learn not to use phone banks? Give me a real person that I can talk to. Tell me to go to this store. Well, none of those choices when I wanted, sir. Or go to the operator. You've reached a line that's not connected. Have you ever done that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I tried that several different options to get into the Forest Service. People who had worked for the Forest Service had children, and they had taken books and pamphlets and everything and assembled a library in Durham. I get on the phone, I said, you happen to have a copy of this bulletin number 13 written by Daniel W. Adams in I think he invented the fire tower in 1908. This is written published in 1912, excuse me. I just had a knee surgery replacement in this left leg, and I'm stumbling just a little bit, but this pamphlet went around the world. This went to Australia, Asia, Europe, and people enjoyed the benefits of this thing. So his name, I said, you have a copy of that pamphlet in your library? The girl talking, young lady on the phone said, yes, I think we do. In 15 minutes, Kathy had a copy of it on her computer. She scanned it and she sent me a copy. And it's right here. Inside that pamphlet is the tower, the first tower Colonel Adams built. Gifford Pinchot wasn't going to build it. Colonel Adams took money out of his own pocket and built this building here. And that building has, down in the lower story, has room for a family. It's just a 12 by 12 room. And then they built a 12 by 12 room that has a heater, place to cook, place to sleep, blah, blah, blah. Then you climb up in the top, and that's where you do your observation. Colonel Adams does that in Arkansas and gets the Washita. Then in 1911, the Weeks, fellow's name, W-E-E-K-S, got a act passed through the Congress that, yes, now the federal government can buy private land and create a national forest. Colonel Adams comes back to Virginia and North Carolina. He meets his bride up in, what's the name of the gap? Jennings Gap. While he's up there buying land for either the George Washington National Forest or the Jefferson National Forest. And then he meets his bride there in 1912. They get married in 1913, moved to Old Fort. Binky is born in 1914. And so that establishes them here. They buy the Westerman House. And Sheila is restoring that. Beautiful. I've got a beautiful picture of it here. I want you to look at it. Okay, so that gets him back to Old Fort. He discovers, while he's traversing this area, the beautiful Catawba Falls area, and he's buying land. Curtis Creek, Mill Creek, Mackey's Creek. And for some reason, the Forest Service didn't want to buy that. And Colonel Adams said, okay, I'll buy it. And so that's how the family, he became in possession of that territorial affair. I think it was about $1 an acre, which was a tremendous amount. Now listen, you can cut enough wood off an acre of land, pay $1. People were burning wood. So, even then, though it was high, and that's a lot of dollars, it was able to pay it back. And there are other resources that it afforded the town besides that. I'm going to stop. Let's take a break. Get us a drink and take some refreshment. Go down Lewis Prom. Well, you can identify the bounds, but nobody knows what you can't estimate the acreage. Go down to the south edge of the New River, South Fork of the New River. Go along in until you get to another, maybe a family name branch, and come back up that branch to the crest of the Blue Ridge. Now, everybody knows that they can identify those two branches. Don't know the bounds, the river's obvious, the top of the Blue Ridge. You get to shoot a little bit. Some of you places in the Blue Ridge, in fact, there's some ridges right going up the Kitsunda Trail that are only about as wide as the trail. And then you're looking off into Mill Creek, or Swannoa Creek, I guess you call it, like this. You're looking off into the Catawba River Basin, watershed like this. You're walking right up on a razor edge. Nobody would dispute too much where the property line was. Center of this trail would be good enough for me. So you knew where your property was. Who's going to estimate that acreage? Then people wanted to know, okay, I'm going to pay, maybe even back then, $15 an acre, or whatever, but they want to know how many acres they're paying for. They want to know, they don't want to know from top of the Blue Ridge to the South Fork of New River. They want to know how many acres is in that. That's where the survey gets to be real important for us land surveying in this area. One thing I didn't mention, while he was in Ashe County as a young engineer, the far picture over there is a photograph of the Episcopal Church that he designed to build. Up there, it's about 300 yards from the Blue Ridge Parkway. And if you didn't notice, I should have told you, flip the side. There's a picture of the inside. It has a fresco showing the Lord's Supper. And Judas is exiting the room, going out some stairs, out to the left in that photograph. My wife made that, and give her credit. And by the way, I'm going to give credit to a lot of people here who've done me a lot of service. Kathy has scanned a lot of documents, and this is just a fraction. I'm talking about a small fraction. And her sister, Sheila, who has allowed us to have access to the house and to the files and to the documents so that we could assemble this. And, you know, it's sort of like standing by a train and watching the cargo go by, and by just estimate when the doors open, said, what is this train carrying? That's about what I'm doing. You know, there's part of it. Yeah, I've got part of it, but I got part of it right. I want to move on just real quickly. Soon after this young family started in 2004, the United States finally gets in, and the United States has been a good country about this in time past. Hate war. Let's don't get into a world war. They tried to stay out of World War I. And finally, the Lusitania was struck by the Germans, and it had American passengers on it. They had sunk a lot of equipment ships that were going to England. Okay, we lost some tanks, we lost some arms, but we didn't lose. When they did that, and it was on. Colonel Adams volunteered. And like I said, went to officer candidate school and then trained. And I didn't mention this about his grandfather. His grandfather was a medical doctor, volunteered, and applied to go with the Cherokee, who had to leave North Carolina and go to Oklahoma, trying to assist them with their medical problems, and probably saved a lot of lives. They remember that. Undoubtedly, they remember that. Okay, and I've got a book right here called Indian Removal. It's written by a man who was a lawyer who helped the Indian families recover their property in Oklahoma that was justly due. My family in Alabama got some of the Chickasaw property because of efforts of men like him. He came back in 1917. Oklahoma became a state in 1907. And, you know, that doesn't seem like that far ago. When I was a kid, 1907, man, that's ancient history. No, it's not. And so it was made into a state in 1907. And Colonel Adams' work in Arkansas backed up against that state. He knew a lot of Choctaw people and a lot of Cherokee people. Plus the Cherokee people knew that his granddad had helped save their lives. So when World War I breaks out, Colonel Adams asked the Cherokee to supply some young men. If you treated me like the U.S. government had treated their ancestors in the 1830s and 1840s, and you asked me, well, John, won't you come fight for our side? What would you say? But because of this family relationship and these ties to his grandfather and to him, we'll come. Go to Fort Jackson or Camp Jackson at that time. I have pictures of it. I don't happen to have it in this selection here where they were training. He thought that they would be great scouts, which they were. But the main thing in the USS, French pronunciation, Murs Argonne offensive, the U.S. was sending loads of troops, and they'd try to defeat the Germans. And they were getting slaughtered. 26,000 men in that one campaign. 70,000, that's dead. 70,000 men injured. We're getting close to 100,000 men. The Cherokee came in there, and the U.S. is just going to keep pushing hundreds of thousands of troops till they make the Germans do something. The Cherokee were on the front line. Now, you've heard about the Navajo code talk with everybody in the room. Okay, when I got to researching this is stuff you find. As you start doing this research, some things you look for you can't find, but you run over stuff. You know, like running a plow through new ground. Hey, I found some stuff I didn't know was here. Colonel Adams was wounded in 1918, came home. His troops had to stay and occupy France for about up to almost another year. They stayed until at least June of the next year, 1919. And the other troops stayed even longer. When they got transferred to the United States in late 1919, they decided to have a big memorial reunion in the Midwest. I think it was St. Louis. But their commanding officer came up and made an announcement, congratulations to the troops that had survived the war and had helped win that victory, or really it was an armistice. And they signed the armistice, you remember, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, November 11th, and the World War I veterans wouldn't let that go. The federal government wanted to put every holiday on a Monday celebration. Christmas is still celebrated on the 25th, and July 4th is still celebrated on the 4th of July, and Armistice Day is still celebrated on November 11th because of those men, and should be, for as long as the world stands. But this man got up in 1920, in that celebration the next summer in June, and I believe it was St. Louis, and he made this announcement, that the Cherokee talkers were able to speak in their native language. If you've traveled to Europe, you know if you go to France, that place in between France and Germany, and they understand how to speak French, both sides. They know how to speak German, and they know how to speak English. I've gone over there and visited, and they speak English very nicely. And I try to speak a little bit of German and French to them. But they said, no, we want to hear that Southern English. Okay? So, anyway, they could understand all three languages if they wanted to. So if you holler out an order, you know, the left flank, do this and so, the Germans know what you're going to do. When the Cherokee said, move the left flank forward 50 yards, they don't know what in the world was being said. And this commanding officer of that Meuse-Argonne offensive said, the Cherokee code talkers and the Choctaw code talkers are what cut the Germans' throat and forced an armistice. Have you ever heard that? It astounded me. I did not know that ever. So you discover some things, and I just want to encourage you in your family, when you start doing these things, you're going to find those gems that are priceless. Write them down. Bring them to us. Make a book. You know, make an archive. And I think it'll be popular reading, especially the people who love history, which I happen to be one. Now, he comes back. Think about the euphoria of World War I winners. They come back, hey, this is a new country. We're the world leader now. We can whoop anybody if we want to. We've got wealth. Electricity is coming in. More people are getting cars. I could tell you some funny things, but we don't have time, about the first car of the Adams family and Grandpa Silver's first car. There's some hilarious things. By the way, there's some recorded interviews, and Kathy did some today, right? Did you get to record some oral history? My Aunt Jeff, our Aunt Jessica Gibbs, Silver Gibbs, recorded one. I don't think it's ever been typed out. This copy right here is Dinky Adams' oral history typed into Ledger so that you can actually read it. We won't get Aunt Jeff's done like that if we can. And it'll be part of the funny things about traveling in a Model T. It's just hilarious. And you'll have to see what she's laughing all the time while she's talking. And you can just hear her in this interview. But anyway, so here's American troops. People have come home. We won World War I. We're able to do stuff. We got cars coming. And people in the country were hearing this. Some of these people have got electricity. They've got electric lights in their house. You know, the first 10 years of my life, when my mother and daddy would get a bill from Duke Power Company for the utility that came out of TVA, it was a light bill, right? We had a light, when we lived in the Linden place up on Catawba River, we had a single light in the living room hanging down from the ceiling with a pull switch. That was all the electricity. No hot water heater, no place to plug in an electric drill, no, nothing. I took in a bath when my mother heated kettles of hot water on the stove, poured it into a number 10 wash tub, and put me in there. We got a bath every Saturday night whether we needed it or not. So anyway, we didn't have those things. Well, people are wanting, refrigeration. Instead of having to have an ice block, we would have a permanently cool place all the time to preserve our food and so forth. So it's a growing country. The euphoria is there. The Charleston. People were investing money that they didn't have. Have you ever done that? They were letting you buy stock on the New York Stock Exchange, $100,000 worth of stock exchange, with no backing. Today, you've got to have at least 20%. I know they wrote that in the FDR years. You've got to have 20% before you can buy that. You got to show us cash. Well, so those years, Colonel Adams was ready. Got these waterfalls up in in the Catawba Falls area. And there was electricity in 04. The old tannery had a coal steam generator, and that was for use in the factory. But also they electrified the houses. Am I wrong? My sense was that Westerman Town was a mill village for the tannery. Is that correct? And around the south, and even up in Pennsylvania where the coal fields were, you had a company. And around that company, well, we look right down here at Cross Mill, Clinchfield, East Marion. Surrounding that factory is what? Mill houses. You bought your utilities, you bought your water, electricity, you paid your rent. You bought your groceries if you wanted to. Now, at Cross Mill, they did have a company store, but if you wanted to go to Holler's Market down in Marion, it's just, half mile, 3/4 of a mile walk, you got US dollars. The crime about the coal miners, the coal mines just issued company script. You couldn't spend it anywhere but at the company store. That's a great crime, but mistreat man to man right there. Don't get me started on coal. But anyway, he decides we're going to, and that's the electricity in 04. Nobody else had it. I said, we're going to solve that problem. And if you go to Sheila's restoration, and I hope she makes it into a museum somewhere out there in the future, it's a beautiful old house inside that house. But it has old-fashioned wiring. The wiring is on the outside of what we call drywall, in other words, the wall covering on the inside. And it has insulators that are shaped of about a C. We call it the channel iron, but it's made out of ceramic. And 2 black insulated wires are going out there, and it looks like a wire right there, and it comes up here to this light, and there's a switch there. Nowadays, all of our wiring is Trinex, or 3 wires and a neutral now, inside the wall. And so that's an amazing thing. Just go look at the wiring.
Yeah, it still works.
And it works. So people wanted those things for that. So he said, we're going to produce electricity. Now, they went up on Chestnut Branch or Chestnut Fork and into the main part of Catawba River and dammed up small dams above, one's above the upper falls, one's in Chestnut Fork. My understanding was they were the same elevation. You run engineering run levels and make them pools both the same. Those were brought together and dropped through, and you may have, if you've walked up there, there's a little concrete building along the side of the trail. It's broken now. If you look at the upper end, there's a pipe entering from the north side. There was a generator in there. And we're not talking about a grist mill, we're talking about a modern armature producing, 60 cycles per second. I don't know what voltage, because you have to have big voltage to transmit. Water was caught on the left-hand side as you're going upstream toward the falls, behind about a 25-foot dam. I have a picture from a ladder sitting on the dam. That water's collected, and it's going to go around the contour about a half mile downstream, and then it's going to be turned downstream into the lower powerhouse, which is just above the parking lot that the Forest Service has provided there. So when you go across the water, across the bridge, that rock masonry building is the lower powerhouse. I think, and I've calculated, and I was going to go up there this afternoon if it wasn't raining and take a discharge measurement. We've had a pretty wet season. And I think there might be in wet times, not after a flood now, but even just the wet, and let's say it's gone down and flow a little bit, about 3 cubic feet per second. That means a cubic foot of water. A cubic foot of water, folks, is a little bigger than you think it is. You look at a cubic foot, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, and you think, well, that's about what a 5-gallon bucket could hold. You can take a cubic foot of water and you can pour a 5-gallon bucket full and another half. So, weighs 62.4 pounds. And if it falls 300 feet from the Chestnut Fork and comes down, then you've got that many foot-pounds per second of power. It amounts to, and I calculate, I don't have my calculations in front of me, but, and maybe I do, actually. If I just get over my diagram, if I get with my outline. No, I didn't calculate. It amounts to, if you had 150 customers in 04, you could give each one of them 5 100-watt boilers. Now, that's if you maintain the 3 cubic feet of water constantly. They had a drought. This was built in the mid-1920s, got in operation, I think, about 1927. But because of a great drought, in 28 and 29, it was sold. It just couldn't handle the power. By the way, the demand for power is going up all these years, you see. Now your plant can't handle it. There's not enough energy there to do it. So I think the calculation is about 55 or 60,000 kilowatts. No, 55 or 60 kilowatts, 50 to 60,000 watts. And one of the TVA dams that I worked at, I asked operators to cut down the flow. I was working below the dam on the bars. Cut down the flow as low as you can, still run 2 generators. They said, Lewis, all we can cut it down to, and listen to this number, 119,000 cubic feet per second, falling 50 feet. Now you can imagine what kind of power we're talking about. You know, run a city off that one dam. And this was a lightweight. It wasn't going to handle the load very many years. And so it was sold to a small company called Japalo. That Japalo company, I found out, was named for Jupiter, the god of power, and Apollo, the god of light. So you have power, light. They kept it for a while. Actually, the property wasn't sold. The generating capacity was sold, which was the generators. And we also found out legally the riparian rights to the waters. And that's another land surveying term. The legal right to use the water. Duke Power still owned that, and that right had to be neutralized before the property could be conveyed to the National Forest Service. And the flow got low, sold it to that, and that company sold it to Duke Power Company, those generating rights. I couldn't find anything about Japalo. There was one lawsuit. A lineman was working a pole, and the pole fell, and he wasn't supposed to climb a pole without his assistant. His assistant was sick that morning, decided to go ahead and do the work anyway, and the pole fell. And the family sued for wrongful death and won. And I found copies of the lawsuit. It started out in Marion, and it was moved to Asheville, to what district court that is, and the family won about $35,000. That probably ended Japalo's business dollars, you know. So they got out of it. I couldn't find any engineering drawings. I couldn't find any engineering drawings in Sheila's archives. So I went to Duke Power. Man, I've been all over the place. North Carolina archives, the Duke Power archives. We know of no such thing as this white coal power company, which is what Colonel Adams had named it. The white water was producing energy just as well as coal could. And coal was hot. It could produce a lot of energy. But hydropower is a lot cleaner, you see. So a few years later, in fact, in 1931, that tannery burned. And so and they decided not to rebuild it, so there was no power in Westermantown. Duke Power ran a line to Old Ford and re-electrified the town, including Westermantown, in, I believe, 1931 or 32. So that's how we have a present power system. That's the hydro project there. I had originally volunteered, I'll write this stuff about the hydro project. And Sheila, you write the rest of it. She said, I've got so much going, John R., I don't have time. Would you do it? That's why I'm here tonight. All right, let's move on real quickly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you for writing.
Oh, okay. The booklet that you see over there under the map, we're not even talking, that's the rough draft of the book. And it doesn't have all the pictures entered into it. And I've had to go back as I found stuff out. Oh, you've got to put an insert in here, John R., so I had to rewrite. And finally, I just got to the point and said, just stick those loose pages in there, so you've got to insert this when the final copy comes out. The Depressing 30s, 1929, October 29, 1929. The stock market failed. All this business where people were getting $100,000 worth of stock for nothing, that started being called due. And people were jumping out of skyscrapers, committing suicide to relieve themselves of the pain of losing that kind of money. And so business fell. Our tannery had burned. People were out of jobs here. So it's a depressing time in the 1930s. Now, Colonel Adams sees opportunity even in that. He starts, and it already started in the 1920s, to buy land and get options on lands in Texarkana If you look at Texarkana, it's just 60 miles south of the Washita River. So when you go places, make friends with people. You might be able to do business with them. You might, 20 years later, got options on land out there, and you can get the township, section, and quarter section. I know about where the oil wells were. So he has a business, the foundation of doing mining and oil operation. All right? My daddy actually worked for him in the summer times when they would go into Yancey and Mitchell counties and establish mines. Now, feldspar and mica mostly, but every once in a while they turn up an emerald. All right? I found an emerald up it wasn't in the national park, but on some private land one time. The guy said, I'll give you $55 for it about this long. Had the hex shape, was kind of a cloudy green. And I said, I believe I'll keep it. I'll just polish it up or get a jeweler in my hometown and polish it up. So I kept, he's going to give me $55 for one little piece of rock. So he started exercising these options in the 1930s. There are letters. And I think he took the kids, haven't even had time to mention the siblings, Binky and June and Dan, on an excursion out west one time, and they were digging, let them to get to know a little bit about the mining industry. And they searched for bauxite and gold and oil. And Binky says, we just sometimes just stopped at the end of the day on our travels, we just unfold a cot, lay down out there in the open air and sleep. Not without the benefit of a tent. I mean, they're just traversing over the west. They're inspecting places. Also on mines that had cinnabar. Cinnabar is a mineral, and at that time, we didn't know how dangerous it was up in the 1950s. I'm playing with mercury on the chemistry table down here at the old Fort High School, right? Judy knows that. We take dimes, put us a puddle of mercury out on the desk, and put a dime in it and rub it around with our raw finger. It's stuff will poison you. But anyway, had cinnabar mines out in New Mexico. And guess what? When I go to the forest in Arizona, I'm traversing back and forth across New Mexico. Meet people, understand what they do. They might help you sometime in the future. So he's developing mines, he's developing oil wells. And some of the oil wells produced, I don't know how long, I can't find those records. Oil wasn't worth then what it is now, but the demand for fuel doubled between 1930 and 1940. More people get cars. There's a looming war coming on. The government wants more oil. All right, Colonel Adams sees a lot of things that probably maybe the average citizen didn't see, or some of the politicians. The United States wrote 3 different laws, neutralizing acts to try to stay out of World War II. We're not going to take sides with anybody. And that was people took that warning, what George Washington, don't get involved in foreign wars. Well, when you're 5,000 miles away and it's that much ocean between you and the old world of Europe, yeah, you can kind of say that. But when you got planes and ships that can go like they do in modern time, you're not separated from that part of the world anymore. And we live to be under the umbrella, or whatever you want to call it, the shade of intercontinental ballistic missiles, which can be here in a half hour, if they want to. So he sees, and most of this is something you may not know, within about 4.5 miles, and I'm not giving direction from this spot, as a crow flies, there was a Nazi youth camp in our county. I found the foundations of it in an orchard. And I asked I was picking apples. And I said, what is that? He says, it's a foundation for buildings. They were in a octagonal shape. I said, what kind of buildings? He said, dorms. I said, college? Who's out here? German-American families sent their sons to camp. And if you said, Heil Hitler, and you were blonde-headed and blue-eyed, you could stay there all summer long. These boys in Old Fort played them right down here in baseball. My dad told me personally, he said, son, they had the best catcher's mitts, the best shin guards, chest protectors, and masks, and had better gloves than any of us. And so Germany was building a 5th column in the United States. And I thought about this, I said, Daddy must have been wrong. We got a lot of German surnames in our neighborhood. I'm not accusing anybody of anything, don't know of anybody that was there. completely harmless, non-accusatory, don't know. But I don't think they'd have anybody admit that today. They may have come from the Northwest, from the Midwest. I have no idea. But I looked it up on the internet, and I've forgotten, I may have the switch. There were at least 27, it may be 72 of those kind of camps scattered around the United States. You think they weren't building a force right here? Colonel Adams knew those things. He sees that camp out there. He knows what's going on. There's the war. And he actually has a statement. We need to get armed and ready to try to meet probably the most vicious army that the world has ever seen. Was he right?
Yes.
Man, yeah. If 40 million people like to feed the whole world. Think about it. With the help of the Italians and the Japanese. Think about it. U.S. GIs went and basically won it again. So Colonel Adams said, don't look like Roosevelt. Nobody's going to do anything about it. He knows a lot of people. By the way, he told me right up here in the old office, he said, son, I had to tell you about this. My mother would leave me at the barbershop about every 4 weeks to get my hair cut. She'd go up to John's Market, which was on the east side of Spring Street at that time, get groceries. She'd get your hair cut, come on up to the grocery store. We'll go home. We got to use the pickup truck one day a week, Saturday. So on my trip from the barbershop, I got it cut quickly. I turned into Colonel Adams' office. I can imagine. You see the picture when he was an older man here. He's sitting there. Sometimes it's like this. He's asleep. And I knock on it. You can imagine, here I am, 7-year-old. I'm intimidated. Oh, made me come sit down over there, young man. He tells me these things about all the arrowheads that are collected in there, about this bowl that they smoked right here. When I cannot cover everything went on. They smoked a peace pipe here between the Catawba Indians, the Cherokee Indians, the mayor of Old Fort, and Colonel Adams. And there was a 4-prong, it had 4 pipe stems in it. You could put your tobacco in there. It was about the size of a sugar bowl, a small sugar bowl. And all 4 men partook of the smoke, the common fire. That put an end to the hostilities that had been for centuries between the Catawba Indians. And the arrowhead was dedicated that day as a symbol of peace between the nations. All right, so we've got a peaceful man who loves peace, but wants to be ready for war. He has met people out in Oklahoma and Texas that are some tough hombres. They're fighters. They know how to shoot a gun from 6 years old, And so he said, I know a lot of men. They're tough. They've been through World War I. They know how to fight. They know how to use a gun. We're going to start training. The U.S. government would not support. They wouldn't send them anything but uniforms. They wouldn't send them any arms, no ammunition. Colonel Adams said, we'll go to Canada. The Canadians were getting ready to fight, kept England out. And they organized in Windsor, Canada, right across the bridge from Detroit, an organization. There's several letters in this files that change back and forth with that. Colonel Adams, because of the political influence probably of kinfolks and so forth, and because of his knowledge, don't want to leave that out, was called to Washington to help defend it in the looming war. They dug underground